Hello and welcome to Steph Time. My name is Stephanie, and though we do quite a bit of sewing around here, I wanted to show you guys a really easy knitting project. You don't need knitting needles, you just need your hands, some super chunky yarn, and about an hour and a half to complete this beautiful throw blanket. It would be great to make for yourself, for a friend, or just as a quick little hobby to keep your hands occupied. It's super simple, so without further ado, let me show you how I made it. All right, to start out, to make this throw size blanket, you're gonna need 5 skeins of jumbo yarn. This yarn is huge. Look at it compared to the size of my hand. To start knitting, we're going to cast on a certain number of stitches. To do this, we are going to use a very common cast on method called the long tail cast on, meaning we get a long tail of yarn ready about 2 to 3 times the actual width that you want your project to be. Honestly, longer is always better. And then we're going to create a slip knot at the point we want our long tail to stop. So I'm making a slip knot here, and I'm putting the working yarn, meaning the yarn that's connected to the ball on the back, and the long tail that we just created on the front, and we're going to start casting on stitches by placing the working yarn on your pointer finger and the long tail around your thumb. You're going to go kind of under that loop and grab the loop around your finger, like so. I know it's a little bit confusing, but go ahead and get some practice yarn and try it now. Because this yarn is a bit bulky, I'm just going from loop to loop, so I'm putting my pointer finger through the previous loop so I can cast on another one. But again, we're going under that yarn on our thumb and through and grabbing that loop on our pointer finger. So we're going to do this 22 times for this size blanket. If you miscalculated and didn't do enough yarn for your long tail, don't worry, it's happened to literally all of us. All you're gonna do is just pull all those stitches out and start over. I know it sounds daunting, but I promise you it's better to do it now and get that width correct so you don't end up with a blanket that's the wrong dimensions. You're gonna do this until you have 22 stitches cast on. Alright, as you can see here, I've cast on my last stitch and it is 22. You can see it has a bit of stretch when you pull it. Alright, to begin, I wanted to show you guys the difference between a purl stitch and a knit stitch. And when worked from the back, a purl stitch will look like a knit stitch from the front. So I wanted to show you the difference. So I went ahead and flipped over my work, so this is the wrong side of my blanket. To create a purl stitch, instead of pulling the loop through the back of the other loop, we're actually going to push it through the front of that loop. And we're going to do that all the way across. My loops are about 2 inches tall each, and I'm just going to hold down that previous loop so I'm pulling from the ball of yarn rather than pulling from the previous loop. And as you can see, purl stitches start to create this kind of like interlooping C's all the way across. So again, a purl stitch will pull the yarn through the front and create a loop, whereas a knit stitch, which I will show you in just a second, pulls the yarn through the back. These stitches are just mirror images of each other, and I wanted to show you this because I want you to know the 2 basic stitches in knitting. I figured it would be a good first step. If you're confused by what I'm saying, don't worry, just do what I'm doing. We flipped our work over and now we're pulling equal sized loops through the front of our previous loops. Alright, and as you've made your last loop, we're going to go ahead and flip our work over and work in the knit stitch for the rest of the project. So what we're going to do now is come through the back of the loop. So our loop is kind of sitting on top. And this is what we are going to do for the rest of the project. Yes, we are just pulling loops through the previous loop from back to front. This is called a knit stitch, and the finished texture of the blanket is called stockinette stitch. And it's one of the most common stitch types for most knit garments, so it's a great lesson, as well as it gives a beautiful kind of chevron squishy knit texture. It's one of my faves for sure. This was also 100% my cat Penny's favorite project I've done to date. She loved it, as you'll see throughout the video. Alright, once we put our last loop through our row of stitches, we are going to put another loop through to start our next row. So it's going to feel like you're doing 2 loops through the same loop at the same time, but it's just because we're doing one row across, finishing, doing another row across, finishing, and so the stitches on the end should have an additional stitch in each one. And you're just going to continue doing this until you need to attach your next ball of yarn. Alright, we need to attach a new ball of yarn. This is 2-ply, so what I did, I actually kind of unraveled the 2 plies in each yarn, and I'm tying the individual plies together so that it won't have such a large knot. I'm hoping it will kind of disguise it. There are other ways to join yarn, but for this I just wanted to do knots. So as I'm doing the second one, I'm making sure that the yarn is twisted around the other yarn as it does with 2-ply yarn. Once they are pulled tight, I will use some sharp thread snips to trim the little tails off. And then we continue, and we will continue to do this and add on the other balls of yarn until we are completely out. It's super simple. It's that simple, guys. Just keep going. Turn on an audiobook, listen to some music, watch some TV. It's such an easy and fun and quick project. I can't stress it enough. A couple of quick tips. Try and make sure that all of your loops are the same length. This will just help with the overall look and consistency of your project. Also, as you're looping your loop through the previous loop, I know it's a lot of loops, make sure that the loop is not twisted. If so, you'll end up with a twisted knit stitch, which will not look the same. So just try and make sure that that loop is not twisted when you loop through it. And you know I had to add Penny on the blanket to my Instagram stories. It was too cute to not be shared. Alright, and as you start to run out of yarn, you may be thinking to yourself, this seems like enough yarn to do one more row and then I'll bind off, like I did. And then you'll start to bind off and realize that it was not enough yarn, but it's okay. That's one of the joys of knitting, is that you can undo your work, and especially with yarn this big, you can undo your work and then redo it. And yep, we are frogging those stitches, but it's all good. So now with my 2 loops on the end, I am pulling the second loop through the first, creating another loop, pulling that through the second loop, so on, so forth. It's like the previous loop is eating the other loop I just made. Like, make a loop, then I'm gonna eat it with the loop in my hand. And then I'm eat it, you know, and we're gonna do that all the way across. And this is just a normal bind off in knitting, nothing fancy, nothing too crazy. It's just a good old bind off, and you're just gonna make sure those loops are again not twisted as we're doing this. When you get to the very last loop, what you're gonna do is pull your yarn to the other side, and you're gonna put your working yarn through that loop and pull tight. I'm going to weave in my ends. So one of my favorite ways to weave in my ends is kind of go in a V shape. under some of my purl stitches on the back. So as you can see here, just going under some of these loops in a V shape, making sure to not pull too tight. And then once you have a lot of your yarn woven in, you can cut the end and give it a little stretch, and it should not come undone. For our other loose yarn on the other end that we started with, I'm just going to tie this in a knot and cut it because I don't quite have enough length to weave in our ends. So we're just going to tie that in a knot, and we're going to use our little scissors to cut it. And there you have it. We are all done. You can definitely block it, or you can just throw it on the couch, which is what I did immediately. I just think that this looks super cute and it was super quick. All in all, this took me an hour and a half to make while filming. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you guys enjoyed. Let me know down below if you used this tutorial to make a chunky blanket for yourself, and I will see you all in the next one. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.